I've had dreams that weren't just dreams. Am I crazy? We don't use that word in here.
Personally, getting on board with The Matrix was huge. I think a lot of people in this industry will have probably had The Matrix affect them in different ways. There was a huge expectation on the movie's shoulders, but also particularly on VFX. Obviously, we're revisiting a world that had been created 20 years ago, so we knew that these assets were alive somewhere. We just had to try and track them down and find them. And it wasn't, sadly, the case that they all just live in a nice hard drive and we can just ask Warner Brothers, hey, can we have all the assets? And they send them to us. Lots of email threads, different people, old companies trying to, look through their backups and try and find whatever we can. We eventually managed to restore, I think it was a Sentinel, a Harvester, and a fetus egg stalk. We find all the files, we're like, well, how do we open it? And none of the modern 3D packages will open these files. So found an old version of the file that we could open it, export it in a different way, and then be able to pull it in. They needed upgrading. They were built a long time ago, topology's different, textures we obviously had to redo, look dev. So they gave us a perfect starting point to build on. And it was even just exciting just opening those assets and going, this is from the Matrix, this is from the first Matrix, this is wicked. Just getting to spin around the models and see how they were made. Yeah, it was really cool. We did add more details, just the way that the geometry intersected and the way that it was previously built. So we upped the detail, we upped the resolution. We were a 4K movie, so we had to make sure it held up at 4K, which the previous versions needed a little bit of a boost. Same with the fetus fields and the fetus eggs. Again, we kept the overall design, we kept the little fetus baby exactly the same, just we extended these stalks and added more detail, more cables. And that kind of fit in with the story in this case because this is 60 years, time has passed, and the machines have sort of evolved their harvesting methods to draw more power, so we have thicker cables. When Neo wakes up in the pod, and he's got all the cables coming out of his arms and his back and his chest, for various reasons on set, in terms of shooting speed, safety, they weren't practical. So we had these little sort of pod connector dots stuck on him, and we had to, first of all, track each of those individual ports and how they move with his skin. As his muscles flex and his skin slides, each port moves independently from each other one. So huge task for the tracking team. They did an amazing job of individually tracking each of these ports across half a sequence. And then that gets passed to the effects team. They run all the cables off, and then obviously he's come out of a big pod of goo, so he's got goo running down his body, which we then need to run onto the cables and drip off the cables. And then the cables themselves are down into the goo in the pod, so we've got to do digi-goo replacement to get all that interaction working. So huge amount of work, but hopefully no one really noticed that it was a huge amount of work and just sort of bought it. I like those kind of effects. IO City is sort of the new Zion of this movie. It's like the expanded city. That was one of our biggest builds. We had to break it down into lots of sort of small sections. We wanted to try and create a believable city that you could feel that people have lived there for a while and they've figured out how to, irrigation channels, farming, dwellings. We tried to sort of block out these different areas that you could buy as real, and then obviously populate it with little people, little chimney stacks, atmospherics. It was set in a huge cavern, so we wanted to make sure we've got a sense of scale. Our VFX work will always be better if we're building off the back of something real, or if we've got something real to reference before we build our VFX. It'll always look better. We can create whatever you like. We can create wonderful environments, as much imagination as you like, but as soon as you start putting something real into it, you just need something to ground it. And I think if you do a partial set build of exactly the kind of idea that you want, you want to light your characters in a certain way, the background behaves a certain way behind them. So once you've got something captured on camera, it's so much easier to extend that in CG and build on the same thing and, be a part of that.
After all these years, to be going back to where it all started. Back to the Matrix.